reason I ask. So there is a special deduction for educators. Not much. It's pretty chintzy, but there is something. Eligible educators may deduct up to $300 of qualified education expenses as an above-the-line AGI deduction, for AGI deduction. So we all know that teachers will oftentimes spend money out of pocket for classroom supplies, right? When we're talking about teachers here, we're talking K-12. We're not talking college professors or preschool teachers either. It's K-12. So the $300, and this is on a per taxpayer basis. So if there are two spouses and both are educators, they both have this $300 limit. Okay, so for a total of $600, but it's $300 per individual. So if you've got somebody who spent $100 and then another person who spent $500, the total, about $500, it's limited to $300. So in total, even though they spent $600, it's $100 and $300. Okay. This is an above-the-line AGI deduction. Again, on Schedule 1. Maximum deduction $600. What else do I want to say? Taxpayers must reduce otherwise permitted expenses by any reimbursements that they have received with regard to the expenses. So if the school reimbursed them for some of that, they have to reduce it by that amount, right? Who is an eligible educator? So as I mentioned, K through 12th grade, they have to spend at least 900 hours during the school year on that job. Okay. Now it's not just it could be a teacher, instructor, counselor, principal, or a classroom aide as well. So any of those categories. Qualification under the 900-hour test is measured within the academic year. So 900 hours from, September to June. That's the 900 hours. But the amount of expenses is limited, pertains to expenses from January to December. Okay, so the expenditures have to take place between January and December, but it's, in order to be a qualifying educator, you have to have worked at least 900 hours from September to June, or whatever the school year is. Okay, so there's two different spans of time that we're talking about here. So, qualified expenses are expenses for books, supplies, equipments, which would include computers and software, and other materials used in the classroom. The expense, and you're going to hear this terminology again when we go through chapter 6. The expense must be ordinary and necessary. So let's define what that means. Necessary does not mean you can't live without it. Okay? Necessary means it needs to be helpful and appropriate in the profession. So, for example, if you're a kindergarten teacher and you purchase QuickBooks, well, that's not really a necessary expense for teaching kindergartners, right? It has to be ordinary, common, and accepted in the educational field as well. So even if it's helpful and appropriate, if it's not ordinary, then it would not count. I'm trying to think off the top of my head an example of this. So for like a kindergarten teacher, maybe it would be helpful to have some sort of noise reduction area in the room. That could be helpful, right? They're kindergartners, they're noisy, but it's not ordinary to do that. So that would not be considered an appropriate expense. I don't know, maybe you guys can think of a better example than that. Expenses for homeschooling or for non-athletic supplies for health or physical education courses do not qualify. So homeschooling expenses don't qualify. So they also include professional development expenses qualify. So if a teacher pays out of pocket for like to attend a class, some sort of continuing education class, then that would also qualify as an educator expense. It does need to be ordinary and necessary though. okay? But that's important, that necessary part. A lot of people, we hear that word necessary and we think we can't live without it. That's not true. If it makes your life easier, so if it's helpful to you and it's appropriate in the taxpayer's educational profession. Like I said, we're gonna get back to that in chapter 6 when we talk about business expenses, because that comes up again. Let's see. Protective, yeah. So I think that's expired. They were allowing personal protective equipment, the masks and hand sanitizer and stuff like that was included during COVID. I don't think that's, if it was paid or incurred, maybe it still is in effect. I don't know. I think most schools provide that stuff anyway. Okay, cool. I've lost my mouse again.
Very bottom, next
Oh,
couple
there it
lines.
is. It just doesn't want to move. It's. All right, so here's an example. William and Lakeisha, married, filed a joint tax return. They're both eligible educators. William spent $420 on eligible expenses for his 4th grade class. Okay, so we already know he spent more than he's eligible to claim, right? Because 420 is more than 300. You gotta look at an individual basis. And he received a $130 reimbursement. Okay, well, now we're gonna have to subtract that 130 from the 420. Lakeisha spent $360 pertaining to her 11th grade science class and received no reimbursement. In total, they spent $780. Okay, so let's look at William here. So he spent, what is it, 420? Minus 130 that he got reimbursed. So his total amount is 290. That's fine. If he hadn't gotten the reimbursement, then he would be limited to $300 here. Lakeisha, oops, L, spent, what did they say, 360, no reimbursement, so her net is 360. Lakeisha is limited though to 300, right? She can't, that extra 60 doesn't count. And, do I have that right? Received reimbursement, 780, received her net expense of, yeah, $650. And so the 290 here, this is the total amount, $590. So you gotta look at that limitation based on each individual, $300 limitation. Okay, and then add those two together. That make sense? Take into account the reimbursements, otherwise it'd be double dipping. Questions on that? I think that's, yeah, this is Ramirez's, which you guys don't have.